And we will be right back. Well, hello. We are here together.
Webinar, yes.
Yes, perfect. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to day 3 of Digital Citizenship Week. I'm Christina Mattis with the California Department of Education. And with me today is joining Ken Shelton well, I'll let Ken tell you all where he's joining from. But today we're going to dive into the topic of what it means to have inclusive technologies and what it means to be mindful of when we are in the classroom or making decisions on incorporating technologies to be inclusive. And so with that, without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Ken to introduce himself.
Wait, so why aren't you introducing yourself as Dr. Christina Mattis?
Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Christina Mattis.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So for those of you that are watching, Dr. Mattis, Christina and I have been friends for a long time. So that's why this recording will probably be well, let's just say it's two friends hanging out, but talking about a very important topic. So
Exactly.
yeah, so
We've been friends for a very long time.
More than a decade, for sure.
Easily. Yeah.
Which is good. And I think, when you think in terms of the reason why you and I are doing this recording for Digital Citizenship Week,
Mm-hmm.
not specific to the topic you and I will discuss, but relevant to the week is the whole idea around forging meaningful in-person relationships and using our digital technologies to bridge the time between when we are in the same physical space and when we are not, that we continue to learn from each other, grow together, and support each other. So
Exactly.
I think that that's a good way to, and that would be a good segue into, our topic. But yeah, as far as where I am, maybe the background might give it away just a little teeny bit, or my lapel. I had the privilege of keynoting the Massachusetts Computer Using Educators day 1 of the conference today. And talk about unique venues for a conference. The conference is taking place here in Foxborough, Massachusetts at Gillette Stadium. So in other words, that is the home field for the New England Patriots and New England Revolution in the MLS. So yeah.
That's great. And they're playing right now, or they're practicing right now, right?
So yeah, so the field is set up for a match that the Revolution has, because I'm looking down there and it's chalked for a soccer match. And then as I look over to my left, that is where the Patriots practice facilities are. And yeah, they're still out there. It looks like they're doing 7-on-7 right now, from what I can tell. So, oh yeah, if you don't know what 7-on-7 is, that's when the take away all of the offensive and defensive line, and then you do passing game and passing defense drills. So 7-on-7. So
7-on-7. I don't know, but the Chicago in me still wants to say go Bears.
of
Even
course,
though I'm in California.
the Bears are the Bears. They're I have no chip in the game. I like football, and yes, I do live in LA, but I wouldn't say that I am a Rams or Chargers or formerly Raiders fan, just football. So
Yeah.
here I am. And yeah, last night they did a function where we got together and I was able to go down on the field. And then when people found out that I played in college, they were like, oh, go run and we'll throw you the football out on the field. And I'm like, yeah, if only things had been different and I would have made it to play professionally, I'd be on the field for an actual game, not a pretend game.
There you go. Well,
But
speaking of
nevertheless,
getting
I
on
still
the
made it to the stadium.
I know you got it to, yeah, you made it to the stadium. And uh, thinking about, playing in the field, you have been doing incredible work not only across the state of California, but venturing out across the country in raising awareness and educating leadership and educators and classroom teachers and maybe even families on what it means to be mindful of how we bring technology into our instruction. And it's not just putting a tool or a device in front of students. There's a lot more thought that has to go into it. So can you share with us, even if starting out, what your keynote was for Massachusetts computer using educators, or just your work in general?
Yeah, so my connection obviously within the state, I was and I would say my first entry point into high level advocacy was I was on Superintendent Torlixon's task force, so his educational technology task force, and some of that elements of the what we did in the work on the task force was literally aligned with what you're sharing, was looking at within the context of education, looking at digital equity. And then, of course, the equity is everything from having meaningful, reliable, and economically accessible broadband access to the types of devices that you acquire, to how those devices are being used, and to essentially transforming not just our learning spaces, but our spaces for meaningful learning that extend beyond the physical boundaries of a classroom to, like you shared, supporting parents and families on understanding digital technologies, understanding the importance around digital use, things along those lines. And so some of connecting even to that, some of what I brought up in the keynote here. So my keynote was Design Matters, Rethinking Learning Environments. And I would say the core pillars of the keynote are how do we design for equity, design for inclusion, and design for personalization. And then here's the two key addeds to that. What does that look like in a technology-rich environment? And what does that look like using technology to also support higher order thinking? Because you and I have had private conversations about this. Is the whole idea around how often do we still see, unfortunately, as high volume tech to support low order thinking, or as I like to say, merely the digitization of lessons that reinforce an antiquated pedagogical approach to learning.
And that's even thinking about, right, with Superintendent Thurmond now, right, he is still persevering the digital equity movement, his initiative on closing the digital divide,
Yep.
and his work on safe and supportive school environments.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that encompasses how are we elevating our instructional pedagogical approaches? What does that mean then for the andragogy of supporting our
Adult learning.
teachers and
Yep.
adult learning theory,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
And then thinking about how are we creating safe and supportive learning environments that show each and every student that they belong in the learning process, that they are part of learning, and that they see themselves in what they are learning.
Right. Right. Yeah, and the thing about that also is to the point you just brought up, it's everything. It is, and I love a lot of the stuff that Superintendent Thurmond has been doing that isn't that doesn't either treat technology as kind of like an add-on kind of thing, or when we have all these things in place, now we'll go ahead and do the tech thing. It needs to be foundational, everything we do. And the whole idea around, you mentioned inclusion, personalization, it really, it cannot be stressed enough. I've seen some research. I don't know if anyone's done any like hardcore research, but for me, I would love to see what is the direct impact on the psyche, the self-awareness, the self-actualization, and then the subsequent investment in learning when a child sees themselves from an asset perspective reflected in the materials. I know that it does have an impact when it comes to reading of books. I've seen that. This is where I think you and I have had conversations about the mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And I talk about that all the time as well. That was in this keynote. but it has to extend beyond the text that children consume. It's everything from the slides, what are the representations of the slides that you use? What are the platforms that, for example, if students are engaged in a creative endeavor using our technology, what are the resource platforms that you're encouraging them to go to where when they do searches for images, they'll be able to find themselves in a myriad of capacities, not have to sit there and do a lot of digging, or go to artificial intelligence and then do an AI generated image because an actual image doesn't exist. And so that's just the representation part. But then we can get into, what I would talk about around using inclusive tech. How are we ensuring that students are aware of and are and encouraged to use things like speech to text, using translation mechanisms. The big thing now, thankfully, is the use of artificial intelligence. It does not have to be, nor should it be looked at as, oh my God, this is the thing, we can't touch it. Don't let the kids use it. It's here. It's not going away. And the current version of it is the absolute worst example of what it is right now. And so the whole idea around how do we look at not only emerging technologies, but existing technologies to provide and ensure opportunities, again, for students to be able to assert their own agency in taking ownership of their own learning within the relevant subject matter content areas, and do it in ways that is both culturally responsive, as well as also culturally affirming.
There is so much that you just said that I want to follow up on, and I don't know where to start, Ken.
I gave you the buffet. Now I'm going to let you pick and choose.
You really did, because what came to mind right now is the emphasis that the Department of Education is highlighting, among all the other good work that is happening, is the literacy program, and highlighting and not resurfacing, but really emphasizing the need for literacy. And it is books, but it's literacy across all areas. How do we learn to read narrative? How do we learn to read math? How do we learn to read science, and all the other readings and literacy that are taking place? And then you brought up the idea of being culturally responsive and culturally inclusive. I will say that I would like to think that I am culturally responsive and inclusive, but I feel so naive in it still, and that there's still so much for me to learn. I feel like it's just at the surface level. And how do I, as an educator and someone who supports the state, how can I dig in deeper to continue learning? Because that is so critical. There's just so much that you just said right now that I would love to unpack.
Well, let's connect a couple of dots. So number one, the emphasis on literacy is that should never go away. And unfortunately, you and I have been in education for long enough that we see that I would say there's usually about a 3 to 4 year cycle what gets focused on. It's literacy this year, then the next time it's differentiation, then it might be UDL, and then it might be rigor, and then we'll go back to literacy. I think literacy should be embedded as a through line across all of the above. But however, here's where, and this connects back to what I shared, and I'll respond to your culturally responsive component. So I define literacy in 5 dimensions. Okay. I say literacy is effective communication. So I simplify it as that's how I define the word. But the way I say it occurs in 5 dimensions, not defined. It occurs in 5 dimensions, and that is reading, writing, speaking, listening, and observing. So if you think about all the ways in which we communicate, we read, we write, we speak, we listen, and we observe. I think the observational piece is the one that gets overlooked the most, but can provide us with the most power to be responsive to all the other 4. Think about it in this context. If you're a classroom educator and you hear the words, read the room, what are we doing, right? We're observing.
Yep.
And then based on what the room is telling us that we are observing, we respond to that. So that's why I always encourage folks to really, when it comes to literacy, to really not let your own thinking or your own experiences create myopia, that it is simply reading and writing. Okay. And like you just shared, the reading is in all content areas, period. but I add the others. Now, where the cultural piece comes in is think about all of the unique and I would say culturally applicable ways in which we read, write, speak, listen, and observe. More often than not, we hear it a lot with our speaking and I would say our speaking, listening, and observing for sure. So I'll give you a prime example. If you take a specific culturally identifiable group and you say that they're using a different type of vernacular. So like for me, African American vernacular English, okay? That is a different type of speaking, that's a different type of listening, and that's a different type of observing. But where it's culturally affirming and can be is to not approach that as some sort of hierarchy, that way of communicating is less than others. The whole idea is that is a way that people communicate in certain settings based on certain conditions. Your observational component will let you know that's the appropriate way to communicate in that environment. Your experiences will do that. Then the environment might change, and guess what? Now it's we commonly refer to it as code switching. I've seen where code switching is often described as a negative. I describe it as an asset because think about it, it requires those literacy. I got to know what the environment is and be able to identify what's the most effective way for me to communicate in this environment based on what I'm observing, what I'm listening before I start speaking. And so that whole idea is taking that into our learning environments, and especially when it comes to the use of technology, to recognize that there are going to be different manifestations of the ways in which learners will communicate their knowledge and understanding of what they're learning. And the more we affirm that in our academic environments, the more the students will be able to, one, recognize that I do in fact have gifts that I bring into this learning environment.
Mhm.
And two, I also want to be able to develop more adaptable literacy skill sets, because not every environment that I operate within for the rest of my life is going to be exactly like this one. You see what I'm saying? You're not diminishing
Exactly.
one at the expense of another. It's yes, you have one, great. Now, how are we going to essentially curate and cultivate the skill sets necessary for you to be able to navigate different spaces?
100% agree. And that reminds me, uh, I can actually fully empathize with that because I often use the term code switching with myself and my children because we are a multilingual household
Yep.
and we put ourselves into different situations. And based on that experience or that context of where we're at, what language are we using and how are we switching and how are we thinking about the vocabulary that we use? Because there are oftentimes, even when I feel like I want to or need to express something, uh, but I can't find the right word to do it because I might not be in that language that allows me to best articulate what I'm looking to convey. So
Yeah.
I can understand that. And so we need to be giving our students that time and that space to be able to realize that all language is acceptable.
All correct. All literally means all. And look, you even brought up like that you're in a multilingual household, which obviously I know. But even in that context, if you think about, let's take a language like Spanish. The
Mhm.
vernacular that is used in Spain, even though it's Spanish, and let's say, well, use Spain and Mexico, okay? Vernacular is still going to be different, still language, but
Mhm.
we don't go, well, ideally, nobody will go to a Spanish speaker in Spain and say, you're speaking appropriate Spanish, and then go to a Spanish speaker in Mexico and say, you're not speaking appropriate Spanish.
Right.
We speak English. That's a shared language you and I have. We
Mm.
don't go to, for example, Britain and say, you all are speaking the Queen's English, which that's the old language. That's not the good language. We have the better language. Like it's being able to understand that some of the nuance of the vernacular that is used is both culturally and contextually relevant to that environment. And that same thing applies within our educational spaces. And if we're really going to do a focus around literacy, it literally has to start with supporting learners in developing an understanding of how we communicate, which goes back to those 5 elements that I shared.
And this now can segue into the other point that you made about artificial intelligence. and how leveraging AI can actually, it is a good thing, but how do we do that, right? And generative AI that we have been so immediately inundated with um, feels like it's abrupt and it just came out of nowhere, but really artificial intelligence has been here. So your mention of speech to text, we've been leveraging speech to text, right? We've seen that in other platforms and even on our smartphones. How often do we just leverage the speech to text so that we can not use our thumbs,
Correct.
right? And so how do you foresee the benefits then of AI when it comes to literacy or culturally responsive learning and inclusive technologies?
Well, I mean, I think there is benefits and there's going to be limitations.
Mm-hmm.
The large language models are only going to be as good, reliable, and effective as the data sets that they have that are built within the large language model. That is part of the catalyst for the generative component.
Mm-hmm.
I do think a couple of things. So number one, I think one of the most, which is something I work with teachers and school districts on, one of the most definitive and effective ways to leverage a large language model like a chat GPT or a Claude or a Bard or a Bing. I mean, they're all large language models. And
Mm-hmm.
on a side note, I think it is important to emphasize here that while they may all be generative AI and large language models, they are not built on the same data sets and they're not coded the same. So you can put in a prompt, the exact same prompt in all of them, and you're likely to get, in some cases, vastly different results. So it's important to recognize that because they're not all the same. Now, with that being said, for me, in the context of what you and I are talking about, and if you want to add inclusive use of emerging technology, are things like leveraging it to provide timely, responsive, and poignant feedback. So let's say I'm a student and I am working on either, let's say I'm an emerging multilingual student and I'm acquiring English and I wrote something. I can wait and get feedback from the teacher, or I can be provided guidance, guardrails, and instruction on how to use the large language model and use that as one of two methods of feedback that I'm going to receive or more. Could be that, could be a classmate and the teacher. The whole idea being I'm getting different perspectives and I'm getting, additional layers of feedback on something I've worked on. That's one of the ways it can do that, especially if it's used effectively. But also the whole idea around, like I actually did this design experiment with a group of teachers here at this conference, is I said, if you go into a learning environment and you would self-describe as not having the degree of cultural competency that you would want to
Mm-hmm.
support your learners, then one, maybe you might use AI to start generating some questions that you might pose to the whole class to get a window into what's in that cultural knapsack for your learners. So that's one, okay? Next one could be to use AI to generate some ideas around incorporating culturally relevant context in your learning. I'll give you an example. I shared with them where it was around doing a fractions assignment. And I said, now for me, with the students that I taught, especially when I taught math, for me, the fractions would be everything from, the family barbecue on a weekend to you and your friends played in your soccer match on Saturday, and you went to the pizza place, and I literally said, I'm like, oh, they forgot to cut the pizza. So how many players are on the team, and how many slices do we need to make? How many cuts of the pizza do we need to make in order for everyone to get a slice of pizza? Fraction. So, but I know this because I have that context. So AI doesn't know that. But what you do is you put that in saying, for example, I'm teaching fractions. All of my students love to play soccer, and I want them to learn how to apply the basic fundamental understandings of fractions in the context of something that a 13-year-old would understand. And then I might even say, use food as one of the descriptors or the components in your response. There. Now that would be my prompt. So again, there's ways to do it that can either create the catalyst for you to understand it or bridge any potential gaps that you feel you may have.
And what I like about this, right, is that you are making that prompt relevant to something that that student can relate to.
Exactly.
There are so many times, more often than not, that kids come home with homework, or they're hearing a lesson in class, and using terminology or situations that they've never had the opportunity to even relate to.
Correct.
So bring it to something that is seen in a daily instance for them, that they could actually associate themselves with.
Correct. I even did a thing here and in a workshop I did a couple of weeks ago where I said, look, and here's how, because you and I had mentioned it earlier on including the families and adult caregivers in this conversation, in this context,
Mhm.
is I brought it up here and again a couple of weeks ago where I said, part of, for example, supporting the social and emotional learning and social well-being of the students is also recognizing that we want to empower the adult caregivers to be able to do the same. And I go, and if you were to ask the parents or adult caregivers, what do they do at home to support that? What's the likelihood that they're going to know? And I said, it's probably less than 50%.
Mhm.
Okay. I go, so for me, the first thing I would do is I would use AI to do the following. One, I would upload into AI the castle for anyone watching, if they don't know, that's the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. So I would upload the castle framework, and I
Yep.
would literally say, I'm going to ask you some questions for some ideas. You're going to use this framework as your point of reference.
Mhm.
And this is why we literally I did this. You're going to use this framework as your point of reference. Do you understand what I'm going to ask and what I'm asking you to do? And then it responds and it will confirm it. See, I'm having dialogue now. This is why I love natural language processing as well. So I do that. Then I said, and then here you provide context, you provide relevance, you provide all these things. I said, I said, I want you to give me a list of 10 things that a family can do in the evening, during dinner time, or while prepping for dinner, and each activity cannot be more than 5 minutes, that supports the social and emotional learning of a child that's also in alignment with the framework that I referenced. Boom. See?
So
We're
what did you come up with? What was shared back with you?
Oh, it was a lot of stuff. It was everything from um oh shoot, it was everything from either, engaging in dialogue where you ask a question about where essentially the equivalent of, you don't ask for example, a child like, how was school today? You ask, so tell me, how did you feel about some of the things you learned today?
Yep. Yeah.
What did you do? And I remember one, which I fully agree with this one. One was, tell me something you learned today and how that connects to what we do here at home. You see what's happening, right?
I
Okay, and
love
there were
those
others.
questions. Yeah,
Yeah, and
exactly.
so those were some of the questions that were generated, but
Mhm.
in order to get to that point, I had to do all of those other things first, and that's where I get into the whole idea around using generative artificial intelligence, that you cannot use it like a search engine,
Right.
and you have to provide, what I always say is, you have to provide guardrails, guidance, context, and have a desired output. All of those things frame
Mhm.
what you did put in that prompt. You want to use as direct, explicit, and simplistic language as possible. And then,
Mhm.
of course, what I also share with folks is synonyms are your friend, because sometimes you can do a prompt and you just use a synonym for something, and you probably will get almost a completely different result. Also
Mhm.
understand causative language, which is essentially one thing causes, cause and effect. I do one thing, it leads to another. And then using transformative language, which are things like, rather than asking it to, I'll give you an example of transformative language. Rather
Mhm.
than putting in, let's say an excerpt of text and saying, shorten it, no, you put it in and I say, here's how it becomes transformative. Instead of saying shorten, I put in a text. Condense this down using simplistic language
Mhm.
that I can effectively communicate to a 14-year-old. You see, that's different. See the difference? Shorten it. There you go. Doing all those things, I'm still going to end up at the end result that I want, but which of those two is likely to give me a more useful response that I can take and now go with.
And what I appreciate about that in each of your examples so far has been putting the student in the prompt, in the question, reminding us that the target audience here is the student.
Correct.
That's who we're here for.
Correct.
And
Now,
we often forget that.
I'm going to add one more thing too for anybody watching. Think about all of the different ways in which you would apply a literacy lens to assessing everything I just shared. That this is why I'm like, first of all, you cannot resist AI. We can embrace it. And this is where I think, honestly, elements of, especially when it comes to writing and observing, those are hypercritical when it comes to using generative AI. Critical and essential.
And this is just a constant reminder that teaching and learning is not done in isolation. There are many variables and many components, to your point, that have through lines and connections, and we have to incorporate all of that in order to make teaching and learning relevant, culturally responsive, inclusive, the sense of belonging, and that technology just isn't the how did you put it? Like the afterthought.
Right.
It's
essential to the core foundation.
Exactly. Ken, it is always a pleasure to talk with you, to connect with you. Thank you. I know that you are on a completely different time zone right now, and you've made the time to be here with all of us today to share your insights. And if someone would like to continue learning with you and to reach out to you, where can they find you?
So my
Other
website,
than being at Gillette Stadium right now.
yeah, I'm going to go out on the field and run some routes.
Yeah, do that.
I would wait. Are they still? Actually, I don't think they're at practice anymore. That was in 2 hours. Yeah, they're probably because if I remember correctly. Oh yeah, this because they had the day off yesterday. That's why. Anyway, my website is kennethshelton.net, and of course you can use the Googles. I'm on all the socials and everything else, and anybody watching, hopefully I'll be at a conference near you.
Hopefully.
And yeah, that's how you can find me, or hit up.
Or yeah. um, what is your next conference in California that you'll be at? Do you have one lined up?
Next month I'm keynoting the Career and Technical Education Conference for California.
Excellent.
And then on Saturday I'm keynoting the Digital Citizenship Conference. That is a collaboration between LA Unified, the LA County Office of Ed, and a couple of other sponsors. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. Safe travels back to California, and looking forward to connecting at a conference near you.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, Ken, thanks so much, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.